Hi, this is Granny Charlotte doing chapter 19 of Little Pilgrim's Progress. We have only 2 vocabulary words today, so let's see what those are. Our first word is enchanted. Enchanted means under a magic spell when evil is disguised as good. Enchanted. And we've had this word before, but it's important in this chapter, so we're saying it again. Ignorance. Ignorance is not having any facts or knowledge about somebody or something. And ignorance often comes from conceit. The word is ignorance. All right, we'll get reading. They came a little later in the day to that part of the plain that was called the Enchanted Ground. It was a very pleasant place, so sheltered by the hills that the air was always soft and warm. The streams flowed gently along, the breeze scarcely stirred the leaves of the trees, and everything around seemed quite happy. But the meadows on either side of the Way of the King were not fenced in like those in the beautiful Valley of Peace. Therefore, it was not safe for pilgrims to lie down and rest in them. The servants of the wicked prince were often hidden among the rocks and bushes, and when travelers were foolish enough to sleep there, they were almost sure to be robbed if they were not carried away altogether. And here's a picture of an enchanted meadow. Doesn't that look absolutely lovely, like a place you might want to lay down and rest? "Oh dear," exclaimed Hopeful presently. "I am so sleepy. My eyes keep shutting every minute. Oh, do let us sit down and rest a while." "Not here," said Christian, and he seized Hopeful's arm and shook him gently. "Hopeful, Hopeful, you are forgetting. This is the Enchanted Ground." "Well," replied Hopeful drowsily, "there is no one to hurt us. I will only stay a few minutes, Christian. Don't wait for me." He threw himself down upon the grass, but Christian quickly pulled him up again, and this time he shook him violently. "What are you thinking about?" he said. "Don't you remember what the shepherd told us?" And he did not rest until Hopeful was thoroughly awakened. Then the little pilgrim was frightened at the thought of his danger. "What should I have done if I had been alone? I'm sure I would have fallen asleep. I've never felt so tired in my entire life." "I was just beginning to feel sleepy too," Christian told Hopeful. "But shaking you woke me up. Whew. We must be very thankful that we were together. Let's talk about something interesting. That will keep us awake. You have never told me how it was that you became a pilgrim." "I started before you did," said Hopeful. "I knew Faithful very well, and when Evangelist first talked to him, he used to come to me afterward and tell me what he had heard about the king. I did not care much then, but after a time I thought it would be nice to live in the celestial city. So one day I ran off to the wicket gate and began my journey. But when I came to Vanity Fair, I stopped to play with the boys in the streets, and at last they persuaded me not to go on any farther, and I stayed there." And here's a picture again of Vanity Fair, a place where everything seems fun, and a great place to see things and do things. You didn't really like it, did you? "No, at least I liked it sometimes, but I used to often feel frightened and unhappy. When pilgrims passed through the town, I was ashamed and afraid lest they should see me. Then you came with Faithful, and the minute I saw him, I knew who he was." "Did you see us beaten?" asked Christian. "Yes, and I watched you when you were in the cage. Once I crept up close to the bars. I think you must have been asleep, but Faithful saw me and he spoke to me. What did he say? He begged me to leave the city at once. And before we go any farther, I'm going to remind us what that iron cage looked like. And he said the king would forgive me for our dear prince's sake. Then I saw all that dreadful sight, and I knew that Faithful had suffered patiently because he loved the king. And I made up my mind that when you were set free, I would ask you if I could come along. I'm so glad you did, said Christian. We have been very happy together. Don't you feel glad too? Yes, replied Hopeful, indeed I do. I am now sure that the king loves me, and it will not be very long before we are both safe in his beautiful city. All this time, Ignorance had been traveling slowly along by himself. The Flatterer and Unbelief never took any notice of him. They knew he had not begun his pilgrimage in the right way, and that when he reached the celestial city, the king's servants would not allow him to enter its gates, but would send him back to his own master, the wicked prince. So Ignorance met with no trouble or difficulty, and did not even feel sleepy when he crossed the Enchanted Ground. While Hopeful and little Christian were passing over that dangerous plain, they remembered Ignorance and wondered how he was getting on. Presently, Hopeful looked back. He's only a little way behind us, said he. Shall we wait for him? Perhaps it would be better, replied Christian. Then, if he feels sleepy, we can keep him awake. The little pilgrims waited, but although Ignorance saw that they were standing still, he did not seem to care about overtaking them. It is a pity for you to stay behind, said Christian, as the young lad came slowly toward him. Won't you walk with us? I don't care, replied Ignorance. I would just as soon walk by myself. I always have so much to think about. What is it that you think about? Asked Hopeful. The king and the celestial city. But thinking about them is not enough, said Christian. We ought to be very anxious to see the king and his city. So I am. Then why don't you travel faster? I am traveling quite fast enough. I am sure that I shall reach the city someday. And why should I not take my journey comfortably? But perhaps, if you're so careful about it, you will fall into trouble or danger. Well, if I do, the king will help me. The king will not help you if you do not try to obey him, said Hopeful, who felt sure that Ignorance did not really know much about the king and his laws. I do try to obey him, answered the boy. I've left my home and become a pilgrim. What else can I do? You did not pass by the cross, said Christian, and I am afraid that if you have not a roll and a pilgrim's dress, the king's servant will not let you enter the city. I'm sure you are quite wrong in what you say, replied Ignorance. I have read that the prince will give a white robe to every pilgrim, and no doubt he will send me mine soon. Why should I travel to the wicket gate and the cross to look for it? It would seem as if I did not believe what the prince had said. Then Christian remembered the paper that Evangelist had given him before he'd left from home. Perhaps Ignorance had had one like it. Well, did the king send you a message? He asked. A message? No, of course not. I should never expect a great king to send a message to a boy like me. Poor little Christian felt quite puzzled. I don't know what to say to him, he whispered to Hopeful. I'm sure he is wrong, but he will not believe us. But Ignorance was now tired of talking. I really can't keep up with you, he said. You must go on by yourselves. And as the little pilgrims did not know what else they could say to him, they went on and left him to follow as slowly as he wished. And that concludes our reading for today. Children, wash your hands, brush your teeth, and eat an ice chip. I'm in a mood for hot cinnamon now. Mmm.